Hey, BBers, Beat Buddy people, Beat Buddy users, it is the Municipal Man of Mystery back again in our continuing saga of how to make beats for your Beat Buddy. We're getting pretty far, right? We have passed lesson number 5, and we completed our song Thor, and we went through the whole process of making a beat, putting it on the Beat Buddy through the Beat Buddy manager, and arranging it and all of that. So I hope you guys are following that and making good use of it. And we're going to move on in the series and get into more intermediate skills. And that's what we're going to start with today. We're going to look at dynamics and nuances, how to make a beat more dynamic, and how to add little nuances like ghost notes and accents and things like that. And we're going to look at how to use velocity to help you achieve that goal. So if you're creating a song and you want it to sound the way you want it to sound and fit with the rhythm the way you want it to fit, then you have the skill to do that. And so let's get into it. I've got Logic Pro X open here to a file, and I'm going to take the beat that we made for our song Thor, just the main beat. I'm going to drag it into the track there, and I'm going to cut this down to 1 bar loop, because we don't need it all. So the first thing I'm going to do is max out the velocity on all of these notes, and we'll talk a little bit more about velocity in a second. You'll notice they're all red, so they're at maximum, and I'm going to quantize this to make it all the beat tight and everything like that. Let's listen to this beat. All right, so that's a very simple, straightforward, driving kind of pop beat or rock beat. And what we want to do is go from there to something like this. And you'll notice that beat has a lot more nuance and dynamics. It's not that one is better than the other. It really just depends how you want your song to go. Both are good. Right, so let's talk about velocity for a second. We've mentioned velocity in previous lessons. If you're not too familiar with it, you'll remember there's a little slider over here labeled velocity, and you'll notice it goes up to 127 down to 1. And velocity is basically how hard a drummer would hit the particular part of the kit. And you can adjust that based on how you want the phrasing of the beat to go. So let's get a couple tools open if you're using Logic just to help us out. What I've done here is I've changed the view. If you highlight drum names, the piano keyboard will compress into the drum kit, which is making it a little easier to visualize and navigate. And we have note labels, and that will label the drum part and the number of the velocity level. And then I've opened up the automations window, which is this key right here, and that will give us these sliders down below, which makes making changes to velocity a little easier. Okay, so we've got our simple beat here, and it's sounding a little bit mechanical, a little bit robotic. That may be what we want, that may not be what we want, but we're going to go in and manipulate a few things. Let's start with the kick. Okay. And let's do a few things just to see how it can change the feel or the rhythm. Okay, so what I'm going to do is option click this beat, and I'm going to drag one out here, and then I'm going to let go of the button on the mouse first. And that's going to create a second note, so it copies and pastes it for me. And let's hear what that sounds like. So our pop beat has turned into an 80s rap or hip-hop song, right? Just with that little thing. But you'll notice the velocity on these two notes is the same. And what it's doing is making this part of the beat stand out, right? It's the part of the beat that pops. And what we can do is maybe make this a little more subtle. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to grab this slider here and let's drag it down really low near the bottom, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10, and just see what that does. So it's changed the phrasing on this to something completely different. Now this dominant note is more of an accent or a ghost note. And if you really drop it down to like a 2 or a 1, it's just a feather, right? You almost can't hear it, but it's there. It changes the feeling. And you can actually add some more accents and grace notes to this if you really wanted. All right, so that's how velocity works, right? It really changes the feeling of a song. And so if I take this note here and I drag this down, I'm going to get a similar kind of effect. Let's try it somewhere in the middle, around 50 or 60. You know, you listen to it a couple of times, you can really hear that it's much more subtle and it changes the feeling of the beat. And that's how velocity can really change the style and sound of the song. All right, let's move on and let's make some changes with the snare. There's a lot you can do with snares. So let's take this snare sound over here. Let's say we just add a second snare hit and just hear how that sounds. But if we do something with the velocity here, okay, messed that up a bit, I'm going to try that again. So you can hear how that becomes much more subtle. It just fills the space, but it's not a dominant part of the beat. And we can try something like this. Let's say I take this and I do the same thing with the snare that I did with the kick. And I'm just going to option click and drag one out there. And so I've got a copy and pasted note. But it's a little bit too harsh. What I'd like to do is actually just drop this down and you'll see how that... Now it's just like the drummer has tapped the skin just before the main hit. If I delete these notes, you'll hear it a little more clearly. You know, it sounds like it's falling onto this really heavy note here, and it's creating a pop as that kind of stands out. So if I continue on a theme and I take this light velocity note and I drag another copy of it out, and maybe third, and I'm going to space these out evenly. And this is kind of like a stick drag. And that sort of, you know, leads you to that pop on the snare. And what you can do is, you know, if you go down here to the velocity notes at the bottom, there's a little trick you can do there. What I'm doing is I'm ramping up the velocity to lead it to the main hit. That'll build into the snare sound if that's what I want. But I kind of feel like there's something missing from this part of the beat here. So it's like making a subtle double tap on the snare just to follow up and fill in this space. That's a different style of song, right? We've gone from a kind of driving pop sound to more of a subtle, maybe an R&B or funk sound. Let's take a look at the hi-hat. You know, hi-hats are where drummers really put in a lot of nuance. But let's start by filling in some of the bar with more hi-hat taps. If I drag this in and it's going to fill this space, this is going to sound a little bit robotic, but if you wanted to make it more of a subtle, you might drag that down to somewhere around 20, 30, maybe 40 if you like. Fool around with it, ramp it up a bit. Okay. Very subtle, but it fills in the space. And normally, as you work with the hi-hat, you will notice that these beats here, if you want one to be a little more dominant on one part of the bar, you can do that. So if I take all of these and lower them a bit, it's just changing the feel. This may not be useful to anybody, who knows. If I want to change the feel a little differently, I can try something like this. You know, now this part of the beat is popping out and it's making an accent. So that changes the style a bit. Let's take a look at how to do an open hi-hat. Let's use this one here. I'm just going to grab this. Okay, there's my open hi-hat. And if I play it, and you can hear that very clearly. Now, if you leave the open hi-hat to ring out, it'll just ring until it's finished. If you want to stop it, you can add a stopped hi-hat or a closed hi-hat over here. I think it's this one, right? Yeah. This velocity level is quite high, so it's actually making another hit in the rhythm. A little too dominant. What I'd like to do is just stop the hi-hat without the sound too pronounced. Okay, so a lot you can do with hi-hats there, just to add stops, fill in some space, add some nuances. And you can really make a beat stand out, hold that rhythm section together. Let's try something else. If I take this note here, I'm just going to drag it over here. I'm going to add a little floor tom here. Let's see what this is doing. Well, that's quite dominant. This part of the bar is really standing out. If I take that tom hit, the floor tom hit, and really make the hit more subtle, it'll just fill the space a bit. Not as announced. So that's a lot you can do with velocity. There are a lot of options, and you have to fool around with it and see what works. And you may need to go back and forth with this and really find the rhythm that is making your song come together. Let's talk about one last thing before we sign off. I don't know what you call it. I call it effective range, which means, what is the range of velocity that will actually start to make a difference? And you might think that taking a note down to a 2 over here or a 1, you probably wouldn't even hear it. Well, not really. You would, actually. It shows up as very subtle things. So I knock these down to a 1 and I delete them. You will notice the sound disappears, right? And if I add them back in, you can hear it ramp up. That's a very, very subtle difference. But, it'll lend itself to the rhythm and make a difference in the sound of the song. If you ask people listening to it, they won't even notice it's happened, but it's there. You don't need your drums to be too loud. You don't need everything at maximum volume and maximum velocity. You can add subtle little things to your rhythm to help complement the whole rhythm section and hold it together. Right, so be prepared to spend some time fooling around with this, trying things out, and you start to hear what producers put into drum beats and even on simple songs, and you start to acknowledge some of those nuances that really make the beat pop. Listen to some of your favorite drummers and see what they're doing there, and you realize there's the basic structure of the beat, but then there's a lot more going on in the spaces in between, and you want to take advantage of those. It's a matter of listening and spending some time with it and getting to the point where you can master some of these skills. I hope everybody finds that helpful. I'm not a drummer. I'm not even a professional producer. These are just things I've learned by fooling around, and I hope it gets you guys started on this path. And if you have any questions, maybe there's something I didn't talk about that I should have, please leave it in the comments section and I'll definitely get back to you. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.